Welcome to ThinkTech on OC16, Hawaii's weekly newscast on things that matter to tech and to Hawaii. I'm Duke Oishi.
And I'm Zuri Bender.
In our show this time, we'll cover the protests and demands for universal suffrage that are taking place in the streets of Hong Kong.
ThinkTech has had a number of talk shows on the subject, and we want to take this important issue up with our viewers on OC16.
As everyone knows, the British surrendered Hong Kong to the People's Republic of China in 1997. From then until now, we have all wondered how things would play out.
The protesters in Hong Kong want universal suffrage. They do not want candidates to be selected only by a nominating committee controlled by Beijing. Beijing, on the other hand, wants to perpetuate the arrangement where voters can only vote for a slate selected by that committee.
Now, 18 years after the turnover, this means a lot to the people of Hong Kong who are jealous of their independence from Beijing. It also means a lot to Beijing, which is concerned that these protests could spread into China and undermine the authority of the government.
The protests are limited to 3 areas of the city. They're generally non-violent and constrained by civil disobedience, although there have been incidents involving batons, pepper spray, and tear gas.
Beijing is on a course of delay in hopes that the protests will peter out and people will want to go back to their normal jobs and businesses.
There are negotiations going on, if you can call them negotiations, where the government meets with groups of students and lectures them on how they should conduct themselves. These have not been productive.
This is really a play for the hearts and minds of the people in Hong Kong and around the world. It has caught the attention of the press everywhere. The good news is, so far, the media in Hong Kong is free to report on it.
ThinkTech is fascinated by the story on many levels and will continue to follow it. It offers lessons to any country dealing with protesters for reform, and shows us again that in the 21st century, relations between citizens and government in Hong Kong and elsewhere have been profoundly changed by the internet and social media.
There's a variety of public intellectuals who have spoken and become influential on the issues involved, such as Michael Davis, an American who teaches constitutional law and human rights at the University of Hong Kong.
We've had Michael Davis on our talk shows on various occasions to talk about these events. We also had Elizabeth Chan, a Chinese-American lawyer working in Hong Kong.
The discussions we have had with Michael Davis and Elizabeth Chan help us understand the causes and dynamics of the protests, the stakes and stratagems of the adversaries, and the prospective results, one way or the other. Here are some clips.
There's a so-called election committee, and this committee is a committee made up of pro-Beijing, or what they call pro-establishment figures. There's 1,200 member committee. In fact, what all the controversy in Hong Kong is about
Did you say 1,200 member committee?
Yes.
How can you get anything done with 1,200 people?
Well, basically, they just vote in this committee, and it's historically done Beijing's bidding. And what Beijing quietly signals, winks and nods, who it wants to be chosen. The last time there was a little controversy because Beijing was slightly favoring the other guy that was before the committee, and he got into some scandal just at the wrong moment. And so another pro-Beijing figure, C.Y. Leung, then emerged. But there's usually little controversy because Beijing often hints at who it wants. So it's not an election by the public. But that's exactly what the controversy is about, because the basic law says the ultimate aim is universal suffrage upon nomination by a broadly representative nominating committee. And so the Beijing now has issued a ruling that says, well, the election committee, the same one effectively, that was the election committee and chose a small circle election of the chief executive, is now to become the nominating committee. And the protesters in Hong Kong object to this because they see this as a committee that will just vet candidates. And so when the universal suffrage is implemented for the first time and the voters are given a vote on the chief executive, then they lament that they only will be given a choice between these pro-Beijing figures and not a genuine election. I think Hong Kong has always been an issue for the country at large, in the sense that in this one country, two systems model, Hong Kong is way ahead of the rest of the country. People in China have gotten used to the idea that Hong Kong is this free and open society with human rights and so on. And they come here in droves. We have more mainland tourists here than Hawaii has tourists. And they come here in droves and they observe it. And there's no doubt this open society that they observe may have some shape their minds on what kind of system they might have. But for the most part, I think they view it separately, just like they view what's going on in the politics of the United States or Japan or somewhere else as something separate. The regime does recognize that Hong Kong offers an opportunity to experiment with different options. But at the same time, they control, like most people in the mainland China today don't know anything about the umbrella movement in Hong Kong because it's all been suppressed in the media. China does, you know, especially on social media, it has all these words blocked out. Now umbrella would be blocked out. And so but there's, you know, Chinese people are infinitely clever, and a lot of things do slip across the border. And because so many people come to Hong Kong to visit, that also they will bring back awareness. So in time, this stuff does appear, and you do see it sort of sticking its head up here and there in the social media. And near Hong Kong, in Guangdong province, which is a huge a place with a population bigger than France, you see, of course, you'll see TV disc aimed towards Hong Kong. And so there's attempts to tap into the Hong Kong media.
Well, you mentioned in one of your interviews, I don't remember if it was CNN or CBS or what, the idea that this is really a battle for the hearts and minds. And I guess it's the hearts and minds of the people who live in Hong Kong mostly, and maybe the hearts and minds of people who are outside of China and all this, watching from other places in the world. I mean, how is the battle for the hearts and minds going?
It's a mixed bag. I think we know from an opinion poll that was just reported from the Chinese University of Hong Kong this week that there's actually the support for Occupy Central, for occupying the streets, actually has increased as of the date of that opinion poll. And this was a surprise to everyone. The data the last time we spoke was that about 53% want the Democrats in the Legislative Council, who have enough votes to veto any government proposal, to veto it. But only 30% at the time said they supported a civil disobedience campaign to occupy the streets, which in effect is purposefully breaking the law as a political campaign, and what we call civil disobedience. So there was this gap between pro-democracy and a willingness to take extreme measures like civil disobedience.
We're trying to examine what exactly is going on, because this is as he's mentioned, this is new. We're cutting new territory on this. Things are happening in these riots that have not ever happened before in Hong Kong, and it is worth studying them on many levels. So, you know, how is the crowd working?
The protesters also have to be mindful that they, you know, how they conduct themselves, because if they're not, they could lose public support as well. Now, the opinion poll said that their support has gone up, so that was good news for them, that a majority of Hong Kong people actually support this protest now. But it's very interesting to watch on the street that they're the tidiest protesters I've ever seen. They actually have brigades to clean the streets. They don't even allow chewing gum on the streets. There's no trash. They set up food kiosk where, you know, you get free water bottles and stuff. They got tents in nice rows like a town.
There have been negotiations. There are certain things on the table, certain things more likely than not, you know, to be granted.
So you have 5 students who are like 20-year-olds all sitting on one side of the table, and the number 2 person in the government, Carrie Lam, called the chief secretary, and her 2 ministers, the Minister of Justice and the Minister for Constitutional Affairs, sitting beside her and 2 other officials. So the age gap between the negotiators the visual image was quite stunning. Students wearing black T-shirts and the others wearing suits and ties, and in a room. And so they had this discussion. As you could imagine, it was the first one. It lasted for 2 hours. It was televised. You can even Google it and see it if you want. They really seemed to all just be stating their positions. There wasn't that much response and interaction in a sense. The government officials were lecturing the students on what they should do.
Yeah, I think it's worth mentioning the sort of the collective personality of the people in Hong Kong. They're used to democracy.
Under British colonialism, they didn't have democracy, but then Britain was a democracy, so the values of a democracy have been the values of Hong Kong. So the people have, in the years since the agreement to return Hong Kong was reached, they've developed a very robust civil society and a strong political culture. So in the context where the government is generally seen not to represent their interest to Beijing, the people have learned that, well, if the government's doing something we don't like, we have to go to the street and protest.
Wouldn't you be concerned that this is really a game of, for Beijing, it's a game of wait them out? That if they can just keep a lid on this and not be too hard, be too soft, and not let it devolve into violence. And if they just keep it steady, after a while, the working stiff guys will say, enough already. I want to go back to work. My life is being affected. I want to go make a buck. I don't want all this trouble in the streets. Will you guys please stop? It's okay without making any gains. And then Beijing has its way. Beijing has achieved this simply by a standoff. And that would be their long plan, don't you think? I mean, wouldn't you be concerned about that being the result here?
I think in a way the Hong Kong protesters, even if Beijing does nothing, have changed the political culture in a way that's permanent. That now the governments in Beijing and Hong Kong have to be fully aware to be careful about doing things like this. Even the government in the meeting the other day actually says, well, even if we can't change it now, maybe the next election we can change it. They hadn't taken that position before. So they're even accepting that, if this is a long-term game, it's not likely to produce immediate results. And I think people involved in this know that, but they're standing up and saying, look, we're Hong Kong people, we're going to defend our city. So don't you guys get any ideas that you're going to collapse us into the rest of China, into its repressive system. So I think that message has been loud and clear. And I think governments would ignore that message at their peril.
The student protests, rather, are happening in Hong Kong Island from about Central, which is the main business district, to Causeway Bay, which is the main shopping district. There's also a second protest movement going on in Mong Kok, which is mainly blue collar and a mix of students.
What's in the background? What's historically in the mind of the senior leadership in Beijing?
For the senior leadership in Beijing, I think what they're considering is the 1997 Basic Law, which was passed when Chris Patten and Prince Charles got on their yacht and left Hong Kong.
Are the students looking at the same deal, or are they looking at a different deal?
They're clinging to the idea that there should be universal suffrage, by which they mean that the candidate for chief executive of Hong Kong should be picked by the people rather than, as the central government is saying.
That elephant that's in the room is the historical blow-up in 1989 at Tiananmen Square.
Absolutely. I think here you're seeing the same composition of protesters. It's very much a student-driven movement. And like Tiananmen, there are students sitting on the street, and I think it's got to be a little scary for the central government.
Unarmed citizens and students faced armored personnel carriers, tanks, and soldiers armed with semi-automatic weapons. By 5:30 a.m. on June the 4th, 1989, the Army's mission had been accomplished.
There have been a lot of comparisons in the media, actually, to Tiananmen, and I think it's something that, I assume it's something that the central government would like to avoid.
It would be different is because it's in Hong Kong, you've got Western media and local media and a lot more of both, and very very difficult to squeegee the whole thing away if something goes bad?
I find that this has been a very social media driven protest, so to speak.
They're in a position to immediately kick into social media with photographs, with video, with comment, which was not possible in 1989.
Right, and Twitter is definitely accessible in Hong Kong, as is Facebook.
What is going on in Beijing now that kind of keeps the central government on edge a little bit?
The Party Congress actually is coming up in Beijing, and I think that with the corruption drive in Beijing right now, they're not likely to interfere very much with the protests. These are the umbrellas that people are using to defend themselves from tear gas that the police are sort of using against the protesters.
Is that why it's called an umbrella revolution?
Yes, because 7-Eleven umbrellas are the best way to defend yourself against the police.
My goodness, okay. What about this? What's this?
This is the student study area.
Wait.
Study area.
Student study area. So you mean the protesters are actually out there just doing their homework or painting pictures or what? What is this?
I assume so. There's, I don't have a photo of this in the slideshow, but there's a photo that says student priority for the study area. They have their own lighting sources, and they are trying to keep up with their schoolwork.
Wow, okay. What do we got here?
This is the tent area and more protesters by one of the bridges in Admiralty and Central.
Okay, and these would be students, not the blue-collar workers section?
Yeah, this is on the Hong Kong Island side with more students.
Okay. What have we got here? These look like a communication setup.
I think these were actually part of the media setup in that area. I don't have a photo of this, but on the other side there are TV stations for instant relays, and there's a live feed of the protests on some of the social networks.
Look at, this is a street view. Is this the protest? Is this?
This is the protest about 2 or 3 weeks ago. They're very well set up. They have tents and...
There's no trash.
Yeah. They have a garbage cleanup corner and signs reminding people to clean up after themselves.
And recycling bins, I assume?
I think so.
Okay. Let's skip this one to the same picture. This is kind of what they're all just sitting around.
I think this is from about September 28th or so, and protesters, this looks like it's the same area in Central with more people. But yes, they're sitting around outside the government offices.
I mean, these look like these could be Hawaii kids, age 16, 17, 18. Is that?
Yeah, for the most part, they're maybe freshmen in college or high school seniors. The media is definitely present, and it's not just local Hong Kong media, but also Western media as well.
These are young kids. They're clean cut. They're in there negotiating against people who are 10, 20, 30 years older than they are. They're pushing for a type of democracy that we'll get to in a moment. They have any coaches or mentors or anything?
I've heard that they're being advised by members of the Hong Kong bar.
There you have it. What's your observation about the police in Hong Kong?
I think that the police in Hong Kong, in general, tend to be very, almost more polite in some ways.
The word is terribly civilized.
Yes, terribly civilized indeed.
The Hong Kong police have been very respectful and very careful with the protesters, and the protesters are responding with conduct that's also terribly civilized with their moisturizer and face cream in the bathrooms. So what's the democracy voting rights that were given to the people of Hong Kong as a result of the negotiations between the UK and Beijing for that basic law? What do they get to do by way of voting?
By way of voting, the first chief executive was picked by Beijing, sort of similar to the royal governors.
So zero?
Zero, initially.
Okay.
But recently, Beijing changed the voting rules for the 2017 elections in Hong Kong, where the chief executive would be nominated, or, well, a few people who are candidates for the chief executive position would be nominated by a 1,200-person nominating committee. And
1,200-person nominating committee.
1,200 people,
okay,
yes.
Okay, all right.
I think that Beijing has it divided into different sectors of the economy. So, for example, businessmen, entertainers,
Okay.
regular blue-collar workers.
And this nominating committee, they're all from Beijing and Shanghai?
No, they're all Hong Kong.
All Hong Kong?
As far as I understand, yeah.
And so, I guess what I don't understand is, are the students upset that there's some reneging on the part of Beijing from the 1997 Basic Law, the deal that they negotiated with the British? Is there reneging there at all?
I don't think so. The Basic Law, well, the Beijing White Paper on the Basic Laws states that Beijing is very much committed to promoting democratic elections in Hong Kong, which they interpret as allowing people to vote for chief executives that they have pre-screened, essentially.
What they want may be different than the law and the deal that was originally negotiated. Fair statement?
Fair statement, I
Okay,
think.
so what do they want?
So what the students want is completely open elections where the general population of Hong Kong picks the chief executive and there's no pre-screening of candidates, so to speak. So anybody on a street corner can suddenly decide, I'm going to run for chief executive, and everybody in Hong Kong can vote for that person or whoever they choose.
So, I mean, I know this is outside of the presentation of this whole issue in the normal media. What you're saying is that the students are effectively attempting to renegotiate the basic law that was enacted in 1997. Yes?
Seems like it.
They're trying to bend it quite a bit.
Yes, it's a very liberal interpretation of the terms of the Basic Law.
So how is this going to go down in Beijing?
Personally, I don't think they'll reach any sort of compromise. I think that Beijing may not be open to compromise because they're holding to the Basic Law, whereas the students want something that Beijing is unwilling to give.
Sounds like a perfect formula for a stalemate.
And a month later, the students are still sitting outside the government headquarters. Definitely a stalemate.
Thanks to Michael Davis and Elizabeth Chan for having appeared. We hope they'll appear again to follow up with us. We also hope that we'll be able to talk with other guests who can give us further first-hand perspective on these extraordinary events.
And now, let's take a look at our ThinkTech calendar of events going forward.
ThinkTech broadcasts all of our talk shows live on the internet from 1 to 5 p.m. every weekday afternoon. If you missed a talk show or you want to replay or share any show, they're all archived on YouTube.
Visit thinktechhawaii.com for our live stream and YouTube links, or to join our email list and get these links and program advisories on our upcoming shows.
We also invite you to be a part of our live audience at our downtown studio in Pioneer Plaza. Contact Jay at thinktechhawaii.com. Raise your awareness in every way on ThinkTech.
ThinkTech will present its 15th anniversary celebration at 5 to 7:30 p.m. on Thursday, December 11th at the downtown Laniakea YWCA. We're calling it ThinkTech United.
This will provide an opportunity for our hosts, guests, moderators, and speakers to reunite. And all of our viewers, listeners, supporters, and friends are also invited to unite. Come join us and be a part of it on December 11th. For further details and to sign up to attend, visit thinktechhawaii.com.
We'll be right back to wrap up this week's edition of ThinkTech. But first, we want to thank our underwriter. Okay, Zuri, that wraps up this week's edition of ThinkTech. Remember, you can watch ThinkTech on OC16 several times every week. Can't get enough of it, just like J. Fidel does. For additional times, check out OC16.tv.
Definitely, Duke. For lots more ThinkTech videos and for underwriting and sponsorship opportunities on ThinkTech on OC16, visit thinktechhawaii.com. Be a guest or volunteer, a producer, or an intern, and help us reach Hawaii.
Thanks so much for joining us on ThinkTech and for supporting tech, energy diversification, and globalism in Hawaii. You can watch this show throughout the week and tune in next Sunday evening for our next important weekly episode. I'm Duke Oishi. Aloha, everyone.
And I'm Zuri Bender. Aloha, everyone.